Good stuff. So we have a packed agenda today. So it looks like most folks are now connected to audio. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in. So I want to welcome everyone to this workshop. And I want to take a pause for a hot second and just recognize our colleagues at Evidation Health who did the incredibly hard work to put together an absolutely phenomenal special issue, drawing on scientists, technologists, researchers, from across a variety of different backgrounds to provide not just their thoughts for the future, but to give us updates of what's happening at the leading edge of this field. I have edited but one special issue in my life, and there's one thing I can say, I will never do another. So Yain, congratulations to you and the Evidation team. I know that pulling these things together is not for the faint of heart. And I hope that folks on the line have had a chance to read the articles in the special issue. And if not, what I think is really exciting is we're bringing that information to life today through discussion with you. So with that, if you haven't attended a DIME event before, let me tell you a little bit about how they work. We are not expecting you to just sit there and listen. We hope that there's a lot to learn through participation, but we really want this to be interactive. We've got phenomenal moderators, we've got phenomenal speakers and experts who want to hear your questions, who want to engage in discussion with you. So how does it work? First of all, we will always disclose we are recording today's session. So just keep that in mind as you answer your questions, full disclosure. And then if you want to participate, how can you do that? If you are somewhere where it's challenging for you to go ahead and unmute yourself, you are very welcome to pop your question in the Q&A, pop it in the chat as we go through. Yain and Jeff will be moderating those. They will pose them on your behalf to the panelists. If you're somewhere where you're able to engage directly in conversation, go ahead and raise your hand, not like this, but in the list of attendees, if you click participants, there's the option to raise your hand. When you do that, we'll go ahead, we'll unmute you, we'll welcome you into the conversation. So again, our goal here is to really be participatory. We want to listen and learn from you as much as we hope to impart a lot of good knowledge and excitement and positivity around what the future of digital health looks like. So with that, I am honored on behalf of DIME to be partnering with our colleagues at Evidation on this workshop to bring this information to life. And Yain, I will hand over to you to introduce yourself, to introduce Jeff, and to walk folks on the line through our agenda for today.
Great, yeah, thank you so much, Jen, and yeah, really excited to be here today. So yeah, hopefully as everybody is grasped, we're here to touch on a few of the papers from the recent special issue that we put out in partnership with Cargo Digital Biomarkers, which we called rather ambitiously The Future of Digital Health. So today, both myself and Professor Jeff Kay from the Oregon Center for Aging Technology are going to be moderating, and we're going to have 4 of the authors from some of the papers in the special issue to really touch, not necessarily to walk you through their papers. As I say, we hope that you actually reach out and read those papers yourselves, but really to touch on what were the key insights and where do they feel that research was going. And obviously to give all of you the chance to ask any questions. So we're going to try and have individual question sessions for each presentation, but also panel sessions as well. So there'll be lots of opportunity for interaction. And so yeah, as Jen said, please raise your hands, please put questions into the chat at any time, and we'll do our best to try and get those answered. If you want to jump on, Jen. So the special issue itself, and I've included here links, I can share those afterwards if anybody wants them. Basically, we've covered 3 areas, right? I mean, we don't claim that we can cover the entire field in one special issue, but what we've tried to focus on, as I say, is these 3 areas that we think are particularly important to where the field is going. The first one really being focusing on maturation, and so this means taking what we can do now and really bringing it to the next level, bringing it towards decision making, making it even more patient-centric and so forth. We have some really exciting papers around that. We have a group of papers more around emerging capabilities. And so this means, for example, translating what modern machine learning is capable of actually into health applications. And we have a small section also at the end that Jen and a few others contributed to, where we were also just thinking about the next generation of talent who is actually going to carry this field forward. And I think this is something we've mentioned before and something we're very passionate about, that you know, digital health is such a new field, and we're very excitingly now at the point where, you know, the generation of talent that are entering the workspace now are the first to have actually trained in this field. And so I think it's worthwhile also thinking that we are hopefully also setting a path for them, and it's worthwhile taking a bit of time to work out how we can make that as good a path as possible. So I'm going to jump on in. So today, as I said, we're going to focus on 4 of the papers from the special issue, and we've broken it out into 2 sessions. So the first session is going to focus on measurement outside of the clinic, and we're going to have Lynn Rochester from Newcastle and MOBILISE-D, and Zach Beattie and Lyndsey, although I think Zach is not able to make it today. But Lyndsey is going to bravely carry on for us, and we're going to talk about, as I say, capturing measure and capturing information outside of the clinic. And Jeff is going to moderate that first panel session. And the second session is going to really focus on translating our current digital capabilities into clinical practice. And so Marta Karas from Johns Hopkins, who was formerly an intern at Evidation and who we're very, very proud of, is going to talk a bit about her work. And Cole and Jen are going to walk through their paper, which focuses, as I say, more on developing the digital health workforce. And that panel session, as I say, is going to try and think about going from where we are to really bringing these capabilities, as I say, into everyday clinical practice. All the talks will just be short 10 minutes. There'll be 10 minutes Q&A. So as I said, there'll be plenty of chance for you to ask your questions. And I'll post the links now into the chat for anybody who hasn't already grabbed them. And so with that, let's get started.
Do you want me to start, Jan?
Yeah, Lynn, do you want to jump in? Okay. That'd be great.
Okay, can you see the main slide view or the presenter view?
Okay. We can see the main slides, that's great.
Okay, that's great. Move the videos out of the way. So thanks, thanks very much for the opportunity to present this paper today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and I'd also like to say congratulations to the team for this innovative and important special issue. In this presentation, I'm going to take a very high-level focus, so I won't be presenting any data. What I'm talking about is really an overview of the process that we're going through in a large consortium. So I'm going to ease you in maybe to some data that's coming later. My name's Lynn Rochester, I should say, and I'm from Newcastle University. I'm going to talk on behalf of the MOBILISE consortium, and I'm the coordinator of MOBILISE-D. So just by way of background, who is MOBILISE-D, or who is the consortium? The consortium consists of 34 partners from academia, the pharmaceutical industry, SMEs and tech partners who have come together in a 5-year project that started on the 1st of April with the overall objective of delivering a valid solution for real-world digital mobility assessment across multiple conditions that affect mobility. And in doing so, provide a roadmap to bring digital mobility outcomes from concept to widespread adoption. And hopefully that roadmap is generalizable across other conditions. Why are we interested in mobility? Well, mobility is important to us. It's central to health and well-being. Mobility loss is common and becoming more common with an aging population and people living for longer with multiple health conditions. It provides a readout of health and future risk of ill health. And also it provides a therapeutic target, but we really need better devices better tools to measure mobility. So in MOBILISE, we're really interested in measuring mobility in the real world, measuring digital mobility outcomes in the real world. And when I talk about a DMO, I mean a mobility outcome such as real world walking speed, quantified using a wearable device that you can see on the screen, a single wearable over prolonged periods of time in the home environment. So in other words, we're measuring mobility when and where it counts, and measuring what somebody actually does, not what they think they do or they carry out under assessment-based conditions. And hopefully we'll develop the tools that will enhance clinical trial delivery and healthcare through this process. We've got an ambitious aim. We want to validate a new digital methodology for use in clinical trials and healthcare and qualify DMOs as digital biomarkers that monitor progression of disease and also predict changes in disease and also adverse events. And we're doing this in 5 different contexts of use. We have 4 cohorts: chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, multiple sclerosis, hip fracture recovery, and Parkinson's disease. And also we're interested to look to see if there's a global mobility outcome that we can quantify. So it is ambitious, and we have to have a sensible process to take this forward, because we're really looking from the very beginning, the outset of the pipeline, all the way through to approval. So the aims of the paper, and I'm not going to go into the paper in detail, I'm talking about sort of broader learning points really, is to share the strategy developed by the consortium, provide a high-level view of the ongoing work. So some of this is highly aspirational, I must say. Share the approach, the roadmap that we have adopted to achieve our objectives, and identify some challenges and critical steps towards adoption of DMOs. So you might be wondering why I'm showing you a picture of an elephant and 5 men wearing blindfolds. I'm sure you're all aware of the metaphor. But so to describe an elephant presents a complex problem, especially if you only have sight of part of the elephant or part of the problem. So in order to be able to describe the elephant, you need to see all the limbs as well as the big picture to accurately be able to understand it. When we're talking about taking DMOs from concept to approval, this also represents a highly complex problem. We need to understand the individual elements as presented here. These are the bits of the elephant, but also have an understanding of the big picture and how all of these elements come together to provide a solution, our roadmap, and whether that roadmap provides a concept that can be applied across a wide range of different of similar issues. These areas don't happen sequentially, of course. There is a lot of interaction, and it would be very easy to take approach of addressing each individual challenge around providing a robust concept of interest, technical validation to show the device measures and algorithm measures what they're supposed to, robust clinical validation through to approval. But all of these items interact. And because we are, of course, wanting to gain regulatory authority, it means that the piece on regulatory authority, because it's complex, drives an awful lot of the interactions. So we've had to learn how to bring all of these steps together and not adopt a siloed approach, but to carry out work within each area and then bring them together so we see the individual bits as well as the complex overview. And that is what forms our roadmap. And I'm going to say that this isn't a process that starts immediately. It matures over time as we've learned. And that's one of the big learning curves that we've been through within the work of the consortium. Bringing together such a complex piece of work really does require a maturation of the processes to allow us to get to that point. And the individual challenges are described in detail in the paper. So the need for large collaborative efforts, such as Mobilise, to tackle such a big piece of work is recognised, and these big collaborations are accepted as a means to address the multiple challenges to adoption of DMOs. And work on this scale requires a large consortia effort. And I'm showing you a photo of our kickoff event for Mobilise that happened last year. And this is probably about half the members of the consortium that are present in this. So this gives you an idea of the scale required for us to achieve, to aim to achieve our outcomes. And also the need to combine collective efforts of what is a very, very diverse multidisciplinary team. We are bringing together multiple skill sets to tackle all the various challenges. So that allows us to address the scale of the work and also the pace of the work to be accelerated in a single collective effort. I should talk a little bit about the funding stream, and I think this is interesting. The funding stream is through the EU, and it's an IMI, Innovative Medicines Initiative. This is an innovative public-private partnership that brings together industry and academia, and it provides a very large funding envelope to do this work, although I can say that it's very easy to get rid of that funding and quickly when we look at this scale of work that we're undertaking. But that allows us to bring together the collective expertise required to really be able to tackle a problem right from the outset, from the concept all the way through to approval. And that's the aim of Mobilise, to take this entire process all the way through. The work's got a highly translational focus that keeps everyone aligned to the key objective of Mobilise. But it's interesting in that it brings together collective expertise from industry and academia in a way that that we interact, which is not normally feasible in typical academia projects. And so we can learn from each other towards this collective effort. The big picture also involves placing ourselves in the wider world. We're not operating in isolation. There is a huge amount of expertise and learning out there that we have drawn on to develop our roadmap, but we also hope to be able to contribute back into the wider community as well. And if we don't do that, we may lose sight of the key elements of the big picture, and we may really lose our place and our way. And again, this is a process that matures over time, and it becomes easier as the clarity of the work and our style, the way we've adopted, or the approach that we've taken, has become clearer. It's easier to see our way through to interactions with stakeholders. And finally, just a few very brief reflections on where we are at now. And I will say it's really difficult to pull together a consortium like this, to pull together all of the elements and to really work hard within the time frame to achieve these objectives. If it was easy, it would have been, we would have been done ages ago. So it is a really challenging area, and I think all of us are learning how we operate and the best processes in this space. And I keep saying this, but these are complex processes that take time to mature. And here are, I think on the other side of this slide, are some of the key facilitators that we really have to think about and take into consideration. Collaboration is what is going to get us all there as a larger community. And that means that we have to move in our mindset from a space of competition to a space of collaboration. And that's often challenging in the companies, but also in the academic institutions. We need to have the capacity to carry out our research. We heard Jen earlier talking about the new generation of researchers and skills and talent out there. And that's absolutely fundamental that we continue to build this capacity. We need to have transparency and shared learning to help us all move forward in this space. Communication is absolutely essential. We have to reach across our professional boundaries and cultural divides where we all use different languages and have different styles so that we can communicate effectively. And finally, last but not least, inclusivity is really, really important. We must make sure we include all voices of all stakeholders. And that's it. I'd just like to acknowledge my consortium partners, and also the funding stream for Mobilise that, of course, forms the basis of this paper. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lynn. I don't know if we have honestly a cover slide when we have some Q&A, but there's the best one, is Lynn. So we have a little time for some questions, and then there will be a more general discussion subsequently. One of the questions was, do you think the large collaborations can exist without the support of a third party like IMI? And if so, how?
Yes, I think that they can exist without a third party like IMI. I think that one of the challenges is often how we collaborate and how we share information in areas where IP may be challenging. But I do think there are lots of collective examples around trying to bring people together and trying to bring people to work in a collaborative space, such as CTTI, for example. Critical Path is another area that are trying to bring people with similar interests to solve these complex problems. So I do think it's feasible. What I do think is the advantage of this funding stream is that it is a significant funding envelope. It is a very fast pace of work that goes on in the consortium, and they are really focused around a very, very clear translational endpoint that everybody knows what the job is. So there's less space in some ways for some of the broader academic inquiry that may be feasible in typical academic projects. And I'm not making a judgment call about what's good or bad here. I'm just it's just a reflection to really achieve a very specific objective, which meets an industry need in this case, because it's industry that propose the challenges.
Great. Another question. Do you think that the MOBILISE-D project, I'm sorry, how many people encompass the MOBILISE-D project? And, you know, what, just a little bit more detail about what is it taking to keep it on track, especially during the pandemic?
I honestly couldn't tell you how many people are involved in MOBILISE because it's such a busy and dynamic space, but I would say we would have a minimum of 200 people that are interacting with the project, and wider if we start to think about our stakeholder interactions, particularly as they mature and evolve. I didn't mention the pandemic, but it's not a time to lead a consortium when you plunge immediately into a global pandemic. My grey hair count has increased significantly over the course of the last year. It has been pretty brutal. One of the things we did as a consortium learn to do, however, was to write our proposal by Zoom. So we were all very proficient Zoom users well in advance, and we had, because we're all over the world, we have to work in a virtual space. So I think that helped us adapt to the change, but it has been very challenging. We have a technical validation study, a clinical study that's running at the moment, and one of the clinical sites is based in Newcastle, and it's very, well, as everyone knows, that's on the call. It's challenging, but we have made progress. And you just
great, great. Well, it's a challenging time for sure. Do you see gate speed being measured outside of clinical development? You know, for example, in the area of real world evidence, consumer grade applications that get sort of mixed into the system?
That's an interesting question. I suspect it will make the transition. It's an interesting outcome that people understand their walking speed, that they can relate it to very practical aspects of movement and daily life. So I can imagine that this will translate across. Sorry, I think I might have missed the second part of the question.
No, well, I just as it, from the question, I think it's just, is it, you know, how will it be used in more of a, you know, there are different ways to capture gate speed. So, you know, the data may come from different sources, really, you know, so-called real world evidence, people sending in their whatever wearable they have data to a practitioner.
Well, yes, I do think that it will translate. And once we have better knowledge of the algorithms, the protocols, algorithm position, accuracy, I mean, the technology is the same really in consumer grade devices as opposed to more medical devices. So there's no reason that wouldn't translate. And it is something like gate speed is an understandable, it's an entirely relatable outcome measure that people have a concept of what it means to walk quickly or walk slowly, and what the consequences may be of changes in those aspects of mobility. So I don't see why it wouldn't translate, and there is interest. I know that there is interest in some of the large consumer grade device companies to actually be measuring this, and they will have very clinical and public facing applications.
Well, so to follow up on that, and there is actually a question that's been put in the chat box about that. How would that look? I'm a clinician as well, and would you see that just to make the extreme, every day your doctor would get a gait speed and then need to interpret it. How would you see some of the data actually being put into place in a kind of a more practice setting, for example?
That is another very good question, and I don't have a very simple solution for that. I mean, the obvious way is that there is some reporting when a patient, prior to a patient going to see their doctor, is the obvious scenario, or an ability to sample information from patients. I work in Parkinson's disease, so an obvious application of that is when patients are having medication changes, and we really want to have an understanding of the impact of the medication change, and whether that's been a positive impact, or someone is deteriorating, they've maybe rung into a hotline, they're living in a remote environment, then that's a fantastic opportunity to be able to monitor some changes that A, have meaning to the participant, and B, tell us an awful lot about how well their clinical condition is being managed. So it would almost be a mix of reporting to a clinician and the ability to be able to dial in and touch base with patients periodically, without a requirement for them to come into a clinical site. And that's really beneficial. I live in a really rural county in England, and for people to get from right out in the countryside into the centre that I work can take an hour and a half. If you live in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, you're not going to be popping to see your consultant anytime very quickly. So really I think that the technology lends itself to having flexibility in both those scenarios.
Terrific. I'm trying to gauge the time here. Maybe we should be going to our next presentation. Yeah, I think we need to do that. So as our next presenter is sharing the slides, I think I somehow got lost in the introductions a little bit. I am obviously I'm Jeff Kay. I head the Oregon Center for Aging Technology, and that's probably good enough. We don't need to take a lot of time on that. The next presentation, as was mentioned earlier, unfortunately, my colleague Zach Beattie had just last night a family emergency, and he definitely wanted to be here but could not. And Lyndsey Miller Dr. Miller is going to present. She's I'm going to introduce her for us. I don't think she minds. So she's actually a great example of what I think will be part of the discussion later about the future. We need to have new people in this field that are hybrids, that understand the technologies, understand the data, understand the clinical settings. And so Lyndsey is one of those people who's she's very data literate. She's actually has a nursing background, but has been very instrumental in this project. She's relatively new, so a lot of the background that she's presenting, these are, in fairness to her, these are Zach's slides actually, but we're obviously all in the same project. So some of the background though is new. She's been with us for maybe, at least more formally, maybe a couple of years at the most, I think. But she's terrific. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Lyndsey.
Thank you, Jeff. Just to make sure, am I sharing the presenter view or the notes view of my slides?
These look like the presenter view.
Great. Okay.
Oh, Lynn, we can see your notes.
Yeah,
Oh.
I'm sorry. The notes are on there. That's what I meant. I'm sorry. Yeah, so you probably want to be in the,
That
yeah,
one?
that's the right one. There you go. Sorry. Oops.
It's difficult to know with the two screens, so thank you. And thanks for that introduction, Jeff. I am very happy to share our slides. I'm sure that Zach would have had a little more to fill in with this paper, but the paper is really describing the methods for the Collaborative Aging Research Using Technology Initiative, the CART initiative. There are several challenges that the CART initiative was designed to address. So digital technologies have been advancing rapidly over the past decade. The premise of the paper and the CART initiative is that the future of digital health research really hinges on methodologies to conduct remote clinical assessments and in-home monitoring. There are many knowledge deficits in the field, though, regarding how best to design, deploy, assess, deliver, analyze all the way down the pipeline, and really act on the data that results from a platform of sensors that can measure across functions. So the state of digital health science is really now at a crossroads where we have this urgent need that COVID-19 pandemic has really brought up for forging ahead with these remote clinical assessments in the home, especially with the aging population where they're at higher risk when they venture out to be assessed in person. But we don't have all of the knowledge base around how best to accomplish this at a large scale. So back in 2015, if I'm correct, or 2016, the NIH and the Veterans Affairs, 2016, issued a call, and the CART initiative answered that and addressed this problem. So it creates a use case flexible, technology agnostic platform that's usable in diverse populations and diverse settings. It's scalable and shareable digital technology. And I'll go into this a little bit more here. So the CART initiative really leveraged over a decade of research and funding that began with ORCATECH. And the CART initiative funded a major revision of the technology platform that expanded its usability by the entire research community. The NIH and the VA provided the funding for what we believe is the first type of really collaborative initiative to develop this type of platform. And shown here are the 4 cohorts that the CART initiative created. At the University of Miami, the Latinx cohort, the Veterans Affairs had a predominantly rural residing cohort of older adult veterans. Rush University had a cohort of African-American older adults. And the cohort at Oregon Health and Science University primarily had low-income seniors. And the CART platform that was developed through this initiative involved multiple sensors and devices deployed throughout the home. And they were tuned to a particular measure of interest, although flexible. So the goal was to have a platform that can measure ecologically valid function in the real world. And the function that we're measuring is important, but not necessarily driven by the technology we're using, rather the other way around. So the platform has the ability to look at multiple functions. You see here sleep, mobility, safety, health behaviors, just broadly patterns of activity in the home, physiological data, and cognition in some novel ways. oh, some animations here that Zach had missed those, darn it. And this slide shows some examples in the home of actual participants in the CART initiative. So you can see, actually, it's difficult to see, which is somewhat of the goal, because the sensors are meant to be as inconspicuous as possible or as unobtrusive as possible to improve that ecological validity. People, we hope, forget somewhat that the sensors are there after a while. So up on the wall there, nice sensors capturing presence in the room. And let's see, there on the door, there's a door contact sensor to measure when people enter and exit the home. And this slide is Zach says, a shout out to all the hard work that happens under the hood. It's not really seen, but it's what runs the entire platform. The cool sensor technology in the previous slide is really the tip of the iceberg for this really elaborate and wonderful platform under the hood. This is a very comprehensive slide of all of the data types and the functionalities that they serve. Many of the core functions are listed here. I'm not going to go through them all, but we wanted to give you a sense of really the broad scope of what the CART platform can address with such unobtrusive sensors in the home. And listed next to the actual sensor is a conventional assessment that we believe would be comparable to the type of function or concept that's being measured. So everything from traditional, physiologic data that's collected with a bed mat, MFIT bed mat, like respirations and heart rate, down to more what's typically considered more subjective things like engagement with one's care partner in the home, where we're working with the sensors to determine how long people really spend together doing key functions like taking care of their partner in the bathroom. This lovely figure that we were so honored to have as the cover art shows some examples from the person-centered view of the data that can be collected and really what can be done with that data. So pointing at different aspects of the person here, we can look at their sedentary patterns. I believe that's pointing to muscles or the lack of use of muscles over 50 weeks, looking for changes in patterns there with this, this spiral plot. Things like sleep duration during a pandemic, and I believe that's the one that Zach wanted to highlight here. Over time, you can see sleep duration in hours. For here, it's 3.5 months. Over time, you can see this period of change that when you're looking at it long term, that nuance becomes more apparent, measuring it continuously. We wanted to give a little bit of insight into how the pandemic has impacted the research that we do. So during COVID-19, we did go into modified operations at OHSU and were unable to enter people's homes or have in-person contact. And that really impacts the way we can maintain and install the platform. So our team developed a protocol and e-instructions, which included videos to help participants install their own technology. So it walks them through a module and provides some videos, and it's been tested successfully with 5 participants. There's still a lot of work to improve and make the process more efficient. We're planning on a single dashboard application for sending the e-consent and installation instructions, and having them request their technical assistance through that. But beyond the pandemic, these remote installation capabilities really improve the scalability of the platform, and they're important to reach people far and wide. So in conclusion, the CART initiative was to develop a platform that could be used by the research community and lower the barriers and costs to monitoring people long-term and conducting this type of research. So in addition to the four main cohorts of the CART initiative that demonstrated these capabilities, and really largely due to the success of the CART initiative, there are now several other groups that are using the technology platform. It's currently used by research groups across 3 countries and in several research areas such as aging, cancer, and dementia. And here's a map of the collaborators who are using or have used the ORCATECH platform. Those interested in the data collected from the CART initiative can get in touch and request data using the bottom link. And we can be reached by the top link for anyone interested in collaborating and using these resources. And that's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Lyndsey. It's always difficult to just kind of, that was terrific. You just jumped in, and I know that was it was very last minute, but gave a great presentation. We have, there's some questions, and so I'm just gonna go through those and see how that goes. So first of all, question is, what methods of data collection didn't work and why? So some of these things I think happened before you joined the project. So in fairness, but I think you may know, there's a number of obvious things that had to be changed. In fact, I might just jump in and say that for one of the major changes that is important are that one has to think about technologies get used, and then companies may actually go out of business. So suppliers disappear. So this happened to us, but we were able to buy tons of this was for the electronic pillbox from the supplier that we were using. Initially, we went into the study with our own pillbox, electronic pillbox, and then we realized that we needed a more scalable solution because we didn't want to be in the business of producing pillboxes ourselves, artesian pillboxes. So we found a company that made something that was very similar. We actually had to modify the firmware, which the company allowed us to do, which took some time. And then that company decided they didn't want to be in the electronic pillbox business, so they have gotten out of that business. But we have actually boxes and crates of these pillboxes for the future, but at some point they'll run out. So that's just a kind of example of a number of those kinds of issues that come up in doing this kind of work that I think others on this call or elsewhere experience. Second part to that question is very relevant, of course, is how were patients involved in developing CART? And I'll turn that over to Lyndsey because we have lots of experience data from that.
Yeah, so the participants have been vocal with certain technologies that they do interact with more. So in terms of, the user-centered design aspects of the platform, I mentioned that most of the sensors are fairly inobtrusive. But the watch in particular is one thing that participants have to pay a little bit more attention to in terms of wearing it on their body. They do provide feedback when things go wrong with the watch, when sensors fall off the wall, or they are moving furniture or painting. Participants get in touch about those things, but the main way that participants communicate with us is through the weekly survey that they receive, where they answer some questions involving, if there have been any changes to their health, if they've had visitors, if they're traveling out of town, how their mood has been, any falls, accidents, those types of things. So there is self-reported data that comes from participants. I don't have the historical view to know how participants have been involved in designing the platform itself, but Jeff, if you have any more insights on that, please jump in.
Yeah, so there were, I'll just say a few comments. So there was a technology use survey that was initially distributed to the participants who entered the studies. And then, and as you can imagine, there's a wide background of experience. And then that same survey was periodically administered over the course of the studies. And then we got that input, and it had, just a concrete example, back to the watches. One of the things that we asked people as part of the protocol was to just wear the watch all the time. It was waterproof and had long battery life, so it didn't need to be charged. But despite agreeing to do that, a number of people, particularly in the BA cohort, maybe 20% did not want to wear the watch at night, even though they thought it would be okay, but they found, and the feedback that was given was that they didn't want to, they just couldn't sleep so well with it on, which is cross purpose, which brought up the important concept that there was another way of getting at sleep behavior, and that was the passive bed mat, for example. So there was a lot of data. In fact, we're still sifting through that user data because that is clearly important. There's some other questions I want to get to. One is how have patients felt about having this level of information captured from their home? I think this gets to the common question, important question of privacy, security, and how that's perceived by the participants. I don't know, Lyndsey, if you want to.
I'm going to have you take that one as well.
Okay. Well, again, so part of the questionnaires that are about the user surveys actually address that. And in the, if you rank order, interestingly, if you rank order the different aspects of the protocol in terms of what were considered easy or unobtrusive or of not concern, at least in this cohort, in these cohorts, there wasn't actually a lot of concern about the data that we were collecting. Now, this is always a conundrum, I think, of all of these kinds of research projects, because people are signing consent that actually talks very specifically about how the data is going to be used and how it's to be protected. And so I think that it's, you often will get, you may actually, to be honest, get higher acceptance or even less concern in people who are willing to participate in these kinds of projects.
Well, I will add, though, that given how long participants remained enrolled in the study, it seems like the acceptability is really high. There weren't many people dropping out for reasons other than life changes, moving, leaving leaving their homes, going to long-term care, those types of things, deaths, a few, that really ended participation before we had intended. So that speaks a lot to how the participants felt about the sensors in the home.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I agree. So there's, I've been told there's a crackle in my audio. Change my mic angle. Just my voice. I'm sorry. No, actually, I do have my voice is a little hoarse this morning. I think I'm okay though. So there's another question about homes. How do patients' home gets outfitted with these sensors and how scalable that is. So I'll take that because it's maybe a little more on the technical side. And so just in, briefly, the sensor setup is set up prior to going to the home. So we know this, we have a interview prior to going to the home where we get information about the size of the home, for example. And then all the sensors are QR coded and devices, so we can track the inventory, so we know what sensors are going to what home and where they are. There's a graphical interface piece of software that runs on a tablet that we call them field technician goes into the home. So for this project, the person goes in the home with the devices, the sensors, and literally installs them, and then takes the inventory physically, and those are recorded with this piece of software that then provides the map, if you will, of where things are and what's in the home. This typically, again, depends on the size of a home. So if it's a small apartment, it's different than a McMansion, but we don't have a lot of McMansions in this cohort. But it generally takes an hour or less to do that process. And so this second part of this question was how scalable is it? Well, it's as scalable as it is currently as it is to go to people's homes. So that's in that sense, it's a limitation. And the other thing that I think everybody knows, particularly in industry, the famous more than one truck roll and you're out. So if you have to go back to a home and service it, revise it, that becomes much more of a challenge. And so we've worked to minimize that and have done that. And we track actually those numbers of revisions, and the curve continues to go down. Having said that, I think most recently, the ability to entirely remotely install these without having to travel to the home is now going to be the way forward. And I think I'll be honest, because I'm the oldest, so I have the most scars from doing this work. I have so far been surprised, perhaps I'm participating in ageism, that these individuals have been able to do this installation without us there, physically there. But again, there's a lot of work to do in that arena. I'm going to go to another question, and that is, what was the acceptability of patients of the level of monitoring, and were there differences in the cultural backgrounds by age or other characters? So great question, particularly the second part. And I think Lyndsey probably can speak to that a bit.
Yes, so sorry, I'm reading the question again. So the different cultural backgrounds, age, or other characteristics. Yeah, there were the differences were really, I think, in what it required in terms of going to internet setup and that being a change for people. So if someone had already had a lot of technology in the home, internet setup, those types of things in terms of the installation, which I assume that's what you mean, or do you mean the long-term monitoring? Lynn?
Sorry to interrupt. I was curious to know how acceptable this sort of technology is. We would call them different underserved communities when you're sort of thinking about recruiting people into research, for example, or giving people the opportunity to take part in things. So different cultural backgrounds, age is often seen as an underserved community. That type of thing. How was there a different level of acceptability of the technology according to different groups, and therefore a different level of uptake that would be relevant?
Yeah, in terms of uptake, so more of the recruitment and installation pieces, it was really successful in terms of recruiting all the cohorts, really. I know a bit more about the recruitment here in Oregon with the two cohorts, the veterans and the low-income seniors. At one point, our project coordinators for those two cohorts were having a bit of competition on who could fully enroll their cohort first, and they were just, doing an incredible job of meeting their targets and enrolled really quickly. So the differences really came down to more the barriers to accepting the technology in their home. For the low-income cohort, I think that the difference was more in terms of installing internet, because many of the participants had never had it in their home. Sorry, Jeff, I see you want to.
Well, I was just going to say just a quick follow-up there. Something that was unexpected and really shows the importance of looking at diverse groups and realizing that one size doesn't fit all. And that was in the low-income housing group. We offered a $50 a month stipend or fee, and this was essentially to help pay for internet access. And we quickly realized, because we got pushback from those potential participants, because that would because they had to report that as income, that it might actually push them over qualifying to be in low-income housing. So our solution was we made it $49 a month. And that actually, but then we had to go to our IRB to get that approved. It was a really interesting diversion in a way, but just shows how there are differences in these groups, and where their perceptions are of what's needed to actually be able to participate. So I think we're at the top of the hour here, and I think we're gonna make a segue to the more general session. And I don't know, Jennifer, were you going to?
Yep. So Jeff, Lynn, Lyndsey, that was fantastic. Really appreciate you being here. And I think that, what you've been able to tap into a little bit today is just a sort of smattering of sort of the rich information that's in the manuscripts, in the special issue. So again, really encourage folks to dive in there. Yayan, I'm going to hand over to you. You are going to lead the charge for our second panel. Take it away.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and thanks to the speakers and to everybody for all the questions. A great discussion so far. So in this second session, as I said, we're going to move a little bit out of clinical development and really start moving into everyday life and moving towards clinical practice. And as mentioned at the start, so we're going to have two talks. So Marta Karas from Johns Hopkins is going to talk to us a bit about her work predicting recovery from surgical events using consumer wearable data. And then Cole and Jen are going to close out the day talking a little bit about talent and the workforce to actually then bring this into everyday practice and into people's everyday lives. So yeah, Marta, do you want to jump in and maybe first just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for this kind introduction. Let me first check if my screen sharing is working. Okay. Can you confirm that you can see my title slide at this point? Okay, great. Thank you so much. So my name is Marta Karas. I am a PhD candidate in biostatistics at Johns Hopkins University, and I am really pleased to present to you about the work we have done with colleagues from Evidation Health and ETH University. I contributed to this work during my internship at Evidation Health last summer. In this work, we tackle the problem of limitations that we face when we monitor rehabilitation after a medical event, for example, a surgery. And there are two limitations in such a typical scenario that I want to highlight. So first, there is a lack of long-term individual baseline data. This is because typically when a patient gets engaged in a healthcare system and therefore their monitoring starts only after they either get diagnosed or their symptoms become so severe that they seek help themselves, or the medical event suddenly happens either way. And a lack of pre-event data means that we also don't have a baseline to which recovery after the event can be compared. And the second thing is that after the event, the assessment of recovery we can get from the patients themselves is subject to what they perceive as what was their normal back in time, which may obviously be biased as well. So in this work, we explore if wearable data collected with consumer-grade wearable devices can be used to address those limitations. So specifically, if it can let us capture individuals' recovery trajectories and hence potentially inform post-surgical interventions. And here I give an overview of what we have done in the project. We did something simple. For individuals who underwent lower limb surgery, we took data collected with their own consumer-grade wearable devices before and after the surgery. I believe it is worth noting that lower limb surgery is one of the most common surgeries being done. We then analyze the data and demonstrate that it can be used to first estimate what is individuals' physical activity baseline long-term before the surgery happens, then quantify what is the effect of the surgery on physical activity relative to the individual's baseline, and finally that the data collected as early as 4 weeks after the surgery can help us predict what's going to be the long-term recovery the patient is going to experience. So in the next few slides, I'm going to explain in a little bit more detail the data we used and the key results we got, and hopefully also highlight what were the challenges related to this work. So we sourced the data in the study with the Achievement platform. Achievement is a product of Evidation Health. It is an online platform which people can access with their mobile application and use to connect their digital health tools. For example, activity wearable tracker, activity trackers, or their fitness apps. In particular, Achievement members may agree to be contacted with opportunities to participate in health studies, or just answer health-related survey deployed via the platform. And here specifically, we use the data from one such a service that was asking Achievement users about their recent medical procedures, specifically if they did undergo any surgery recently, what was the type of the surgery, what was its date, and the time they think it took them to recover. We had more than 1,300 users who reported undergoing lower limb surgery recently and who also had their Fitbit data connected with the app and contributed the data in a time frame ranging from a half a year before to half a year after the surgery. Specifically, the data included steps and heart rate measurements on a minute level, and also efficiency score, which is collected on a daily basis. And I am going to jump to the results right away now. So this plot is showing the effect of a surgery on a physical activity as measured with a daily number of steps. Specifically, as you can see from the y-axis, what we are presenting is the estimated difference in a daily number of steps in weeks a little bit before and way after the surgery, as they are compared to the baseline that we set from 6 months before to 3 months before the surgery. And the plot shows values estimate for what you can think a typical person in our cohort, which was a 40-year-old individual, across 3 different subtypes of surgeries that we distinguish based on the survey we conducted. So what we can see is the surgery to make a bone fracture repair, a surgery which is a tendon or ligament repair or reconstruction, or a group which consists of patients who underwent knee or hip joint replacement. And as expected, as you can see from the points, all surgeries resulted in a significant changes in physical activity as measured with steps. So specifically, we see that steps count is typically reduced by from 3,000 to 4,000 steps daily in the first few weeks after the surgery, and it is returning close to what was the estimated baseline in around 8 to 12 weeks. However, we also observe differences between the surgeries. And for example, the blocks I'm highlighting right now show that significant pre-surgical reduction in steps was seen already 10 weeks prior to the surgery in this middle group, which is a tendon or ligament repair. In the paper, we provide more discussion about what we believe it might be exhibiting. And this is different compared to, for example, 2 other types of the surgeries we are considering. This slide shows a similar result, but it compares individuals who self-reported that their recovery took them either up to 2 months versus the group who reported that their recovery took them 3 or more months. So what we can see is that indeed the passively collected consumer-grade wearable data captured the differences in average between those groups in terms of the what was the drop of the activity level compared to the baseline. So you can see that the yellow line, which is corresponding to individuals who recover, for whom the recovery took longer time, is exhibiting larger drop compared to the baseline than the red group, which is corresponding to the faster recovery track individuals. In the paper, we present similar results for heart rate and sleep efficiency measurements as well. It is just for the sake of time, I limited myself to the steps today. And we also explained the methods work we did to handle this data, in particular, how we handle missing data without excluding the users or doing some arbitrary imputation, and also how we adjusted for age, seasonal effect, or effect of a day of a week in this analysis. Last but not least, I want to present the results in which we wanted to see how well we can do in predicting the time needed to recover on individual level based on their wearable data. So in the experiment we conducted, we used a subcohort of tendon and ligament surgery patients. It was primarily because that was the largest group out of the individuals we had in our data. And we compared the predictive performance. We compared the predictive performance of the models in the task of classifying the individuals into the group which is going to recover faster or slower. So here on the left-hand side, we can actually see the definition of the classes of individuals I'm trying to predict. And the key result is that using features constructed from wearable data from until 4 weeks post-surgery only, which is here denoted by this yellowish background, we were able to get a good prediction accuracy. And most importantly, the prediction accuracy was greatly improved once we did incorporate into the analysis features that were using the baseline physical activity information about our individuals. So in summary, Achievement Platform allowed us to passively collect consumer-grade wearable data and deploy health survey that we use in this analysis. Furthermore, we showed that the data captured with consumer-grade wearable devices worn by the patients and collected passively allowed us to capture the effect of lower limb surgery and allowed us to predict subjective recovery time. And in particular, we also demonstrated that the fact that we are able to access long-term individual baseline data yielded more accurate predictions at as early point as using the data only 4 weeks after the surgery. And in the future, we hope to give even further evidence that the consumer devices can become a useful tool for providing personalized recommendations, specifically based on this individual baseline that we can observe. And that concludes my presentation. I appreciate your attention. I would be happy to take questions if there are any.
Great, thank you so much, Marta. This was a really nice presentation of, yeah, there's a lot of information to get through here, and yeah, we have some questions. You mentioned dealing with missing data, so not excluding patients if they didn't contribute data. Can you add a little bit of color to that?
Yes, sure, absolutely. So in a paper that I greatly encourage you to take a look at that, we describe this process in a great detail. The big picture is that we were trying not to exclude the individuals as long as they contributed any data within the time frame we considered. This is because we wanted to avoid the situation that we were excluding participants based on some data density criterion that turns out to be informative. For example, you can imagine the situation that if the patient is doing really bad after the surgery, they may be more likely not to wear the sensor. And by excluding those individuals, we can actually bias our estimations by excluding the patients which are doing really bad. So in short, the way we handled that technically was by employing linear mix models in the modeling, which allow us to specify a random intercept per each individual, and in that way include their data, even though for some days we did not have measurements for them.
Great, thank you. And then we have a whole series of questions around incentivization and motivation. So I'll try and summarize the several questions here. So firstly, obviously, when you move from modeling on a cohort level to predictions on an individual level, that involves a certain transition in terms of what you're able to say to an individual. And then there's a whole slew of questions really around how do you think that information could be used to motivate patients, or how would you envisage that information being used in the future, being fed back to the participants?
Oh, I think I may need to reiterate the question in other ways. So the question is about how I can do what to incentivize individuals? Or
how do you think these insights could be used to incentivize patients?
I really like this question. So I'm going to share what is my hypothesis about this question. Based on my experience with working with this data and how my thoughts were wrapping around that, it seems to me that as we are providing more evidence that indeed consumer grade wearable device collected data can provide useful insights, for example, in such situations, and can be really helpful in distinguishing between the situations when somebody may deviate from, for example, what is the normal track of a recovery. That can be really incentivizing individuals to sync in their own data to, I'm going to use the example from my own work, to applications such as achievement, to be able to learn insights that they may receive because of participating in such programs. And I guess lower limb surgery, or generally a medical event as severe as a surgery, is only one of the examples of that. But I can imagine that the consumer wearable devices and data from that actually are opening the spectrum of investigating even more subtle changes in your physical activity. For example, the subtle changes in your habits or subtle changes in some other disturbances. So for example, sleep that you yourself may not be able to spot that they started to happening, but the tracking devices and the application can let you know about that.
Great, thank you. Maybe just time for one last question. If you redid this study, oh God, there's even more questions in. Yeah, if you redid this study, what would you change? So just to clarify for everybody online, this is actually a retrospective study. So this is one of the important parts of using consumer wearables when you're doing this kind of work is that you have data from before the event actually happened, which typically doesn't happen except outside of natural history studies. But what would you change if you re-implemented this, Marta?
Oh yeah, again, I'm smiling over this question because, as you can imagine, from an analyst perspective, when you are doing data analysis of a retrospectively collected data, there's so many moments when you are saying, oh, I wish we had this and this and this information. And this is definitely the case with this analysis as well. I would say that perhaps the primary thing I would like to have in this analysis is maybe a little bit more detailed information about the medical event the individuals went for. So as I briefly outlined, the data for the study is sourced via the achievement platform survey that asks individuals about their past experiences when it comes to medical events. And at the time they were asked to specify what medical event they went for, there was a limited number of answers they were to choose from, which limits the granularity or like the resolution of the type of the procedure we may use in the analysis. So you may recall from one of the slides that I was referring to the group which underwent knee or hip replacement surgery. I would really like to have a more high resolution split about these individuals. I would also like to be able to account for a couple of other factors. For example, I can envision that the information whether or not individual had to come back to work very briefly after the surgery would be very useful, because it can like surely affect what is their daily number of steps, step measurement. There are some other things as well. For example, what was the other care they were receiving as they were recovering? I believe that such information could greatly complement the analysis we have done. Thank you for the questions.
No problem. No, there's lots of other questions coming in. I think we're going to save some of the last questions now, which also deal with some bigger topics. And we're going to move on to the last talk for today, which is going to switch gear ever so slightly towards, as I say, the workforce development. But as I say, again, is in with this theme of how do we move this work into everyday clinical practice. So with that, I'll hand over to Jen and Cole, and then at the end, we're going to have a brief panel session to close out this session.
Fantastic. Marta, I was watching the questions come in on your talk, so I'm excited to make sure we get to all of those during our panel discussion. So Cole and I are going to talk a little bit about our piece where we went ahead and thought about how do we develop the workforce to ensure that this sort of imagined future, that the full possibility of digital medicine can actually be realized. And it was a phenomenal process, and Cole was absolutely the best partner I could have worked with on this really, really hard question. So before we dive in, Cole, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone on the line here?
Sure. So my name is Dr. Cole Zanetti. I wear many different hats, but I'm going to be the Chief Health Information Officer for the VA in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm a director for a digital health track at a medical school here in Colorado. And I'm also a senior advisor for the VHA innovation ecosystem for the health arm of the VA.
Cole, I always feel like I'm getting stuff done here at Dime. I'm quite proud of myself, and then I talk to you and I feel like I'm lazy. So as I said, this was the vantage point that you have, not only as a clinician, but educating the future sort of workforce, taking care of our warfighters after they come home, and that sort of line of sight across different settings made this such an interesting exercise. Very briefly, for folks who don't know me, my name's Jen Goldsack. I'm the Executive Director here at the Digital Medicine Society. And this is something we think about a lot, right? Dime is a professional, organization. Our entire goal is to support and foster the very diverse workforce needed for the future, to bring folks together from a variety of different disciplines, and to think about using research, communication and education and community building to advance the field. That's our bread and butter. But it still wasn't easy to sort of dive in and do this. So the way Cole and I are going to handle this, just to orient you all, we're going to spend about 10 minutes basically having a conversation and maybe let you in a little bit behind the scenes to some of the conversation we had in putting this together. And we really tackled it in 3 steps. We thought about, well, what actually is digital medicine and what does good look like? You know, we need to have that as our North Star going forward. Then we thought about, well, who is involved? What are the roles and where are the gaps when we think about workforce? And then what are our recommendations going forward? So we've got some visuals here just to sort of support us in that conversation, and that's what we're going to do. We spent a lot of time at Dime thinking about defining digital medicine and what good looks like. I talk a lot. So Cole, I'm going to hand over to you. You had some really insightful comments in thinking about sort of what it actually means to deliver digital medicine, and is it indeed different to what we're doing now?
Yeah, you know, when we actually look into the field of digital medicine, it being so new and frankly foreign to a lot of the healthcare teams out there. Not all of them. Some of them are doing amazing work in this area, but it's, you know, this is an emerging field. We've seen this explode during the COVID crisis, and the need for that training was so blatantly apparent and frankly appalling that, you know, the concept of digital medicine became topics of discussion in health systems all across this country. So that, you know, I think what we shifted from is the typical conversation of digital health and being it more consumer-based data production and how that interfaces with the health system, to this concept of digital medicine, which is really honing in on robust studies, making sure we have clear clinical evidence, making sure that we have the same language and standards and measures needed to make this developing field into something that really is able to have the impact that it potentially can over time. So I think that, you know, that was one of the big takeaways of our dynamic discussions on this topic.
I love how you raised the need for being evidence-based. And I think one of the things that Cole and I spoke about with regards to the field, but also with regards to preparing the workforce, is that I think there's a false dichotomy out there. And Cole, correct me if you think I'm misspeaking or misrepresenting our conversations in any way, but there's a false dichotomy out there between the ability to move quickly and the ability to do something well, right? That applies to generating evidence around the tools themselves, but also thinking about how we prepare our colleagues to be able to sort of contribute their best to the field. And we've got a lot to get through and we've only got 10 minutes. So I think that was something that came out. The other thing that I wanted to share through sort of mine and Cole's discussions here was we thought, well, now we sort of defined digital medicine, what does good look like? And I had the bright idea that we'll go and start with, I think it was the WHO's definition of sort of high quality healthcare. And I jotted it down in my notes to make sure I got it right. And it talks about the safe, effective, timely, efficient, equitable, and person-centered delivery of care. And Cole and I sort of thought, well, that's it, isn't it? You know, it isn't different for digital, right? The North Star remains the same. Mm-hmm. We just now have this whole suite of resources that we can use and integrate to try and actually, frankly, better achieve those goals. Cole, is there anything else we should add on this before we move ahead to talk a little bit about now who are the individuals that are responsible for leading the charge here?
I think the only other thing I would add is you know, when people are being trained in healthcare, you know, a lot of times they're not necessarily trained to the robust level necessary to evaluate clinical evidence, you know, and studies, right? We're, you know, targeted towards references. And when you have an emerging field like this, it is really necessary to not only be able to evaluate this stuff robustly, but also be aware of the biases and the ethical dilemmas that you're going to run into.
It's almost like we prepared. That was a terrific segue, because I think the ethical dilemma is really important. We've done some work on this at Dime, because obviously if our mission is to try and support the field writ large, we needed to know who was in it. And one of the things that we talked about in terms of, core skills was clearly we need the technical expertise. We need the clinical expertise. And for anyone, and Cole, you might want to riff on this in a second, who thinks that that's going to go away in a digital era, in my opinion, has lost their mind. It's going to change the level of expertise that's at the table and the level of the license that our clinical colleagues work at, but it's not going away, nor should it. But we also thought about the need for better engaging our patient colleagues and citizen scientists. We thought about the need for tech folks you might not think about, like security researchers. And just like you were saying, Cole, we need to have like our bioethicists sort of colleagues at the table, and frankly, folks who can look for things like bias in all of these tools and in their deployments. How do you handle this? You run one of the first 4-year sort of, college programs at a School of Osteopathic Medicine, training the future of our clinicians. How do you think about cramming this all into the curriculum and or preparing future physicians to collaborate with this very diverse field?
Yeah, well, first thing I'll say is that we made sure that we had an ethicist on our faculty who was, made sure that we had an ethical conversation with every single module, because that's how significant it is. I mean, we're living proof of, the dilemmas we're facing when we're trying to find, identify COVID positive cases and tracking and exposure and what's coming out from Apple, for example, in terms of applications to help assist states and local entities. It's a lot of broad strokes. You're covering a lot of material and concepts because it touches everything. That's the thing. It's not necessarily something separate from the training in healthcare. It's something that you're putting on top of it that covers it all. It's how this enhances our ability to execute on our mission and what we're here to do as healthcare team members. Improving communication, addressing patient safety, and really bringing an expertise to the table that emphasizes that person-centered design, which I think has been left out so often in how we think about collecting data or even inputting information in a health record. So, having a voice on and an emphasis on designing these experiences to not only be able to produce good outcomes, but to be seamless in how we interact with each other so that it is not obtrusive or obstructive. Because if either of these things are existent, they're not going to be effective, no matter how effective they were in some lab type scenario.
I really like that. And I'm thinking about a few things you schooled me on, frankly, as we were preparing this, which is, it's not just about making sure that we don't have skills gaps across the field writ large. It's actually making sure that folks aren't in silos all over the place. And Cole, you brought up a really good example that actually we took the time to work into the paper because it was such a good one, about clinicians who are ready to go and take on CMO positions, for example, in startups. Like how there's an almost overwhelming sort of amount of skills that we want folks to have, technical skills, business skills. Do you want to riff on that a bit? Because I learned a lot from you.
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's important for us to understand the economics of this field as well, right? As much of a innocent and pure heart as I am, that just wants public health and medicine to do what we have been able to prove that we can do. Reimbursement has an effect, right? And we have to understand the dynamics of those types of contracts. We have to understand the ability to show what an everyday interface with a physician and a patient actually looks like, and what is going to make sense for that interaction. We have a lot of, it's honestly bringing common sense back to how we think about design, right? A lot of times people think, well, metformin, for example, when you're treating someone with diabetes, has great evidence and people should just take it. But when people have to choose between paying for a medication and keeping their lights on, it's these social determinants of health that really take the main precedent and whether things are actually going to work. So it's when you're training to be able to walk out into these roles, it's bringing a sense of practicality. It's understanding the current dynamic of health insurance and reimbursement, as well as the clinical expertise that you bring to the table. As we move into this field, there's robust amount of data that are being thrown our way. And we already have too much that we're trying to look at as clinicians, right? So, how do we tease out what's clinically useful from just noise? And if we don't figure that stuff out, it's also going to create more burden that we don't need in healthcare. So it's a matter of balancing all of these different facets so that when you walk into a role like that, you're able to help a group that's working for good clinical outcomes, design an intervention or software or a product that will actually benefit the patient and the health system that we are hoping to achieve in the future.
I love that, and that was so well articulated. What I'll do, because I want to make sure we have enough time for questions and answers, I'll put up sort of, Cole and I worked really hard to try and distill all of this into something that felt sort of both tangible and practically achievable. Cole, I'll let you review our sort of three-pronged framework here, but what I would say for folks in the chat now, but also, after the fact, the reason Cole and I were honored to work on this, Cole is actively training the next generation of clinicians, running a digital health program at a medical school. Here at Dime, we are actively working with folks currently in the field, trying to advance it. We welcome your thoughts and feedback on this. This was an academic paper, but not an academic exercise. We are very, very serious about working hard to implement this. So with that, Cole, let me hand over to you to walk through this, and then let's dive into some discussion.
Sure. So, we pulled out or crystallized 3 different components here in terms of recommendations to try to address not only the gaps that we're talking about, but just the infrastructure and the need to be thoughtful of how to develop that infrastructure. So the concept of big tent thinking, to recognize importance of these skills, I think we're seeing this play out today, right now, right? COVID has really expedited all of this, as partly mentioned. The need to be able to do things safely, remotely, and conveniently for patients has been brought to the attention. So you're seeing this convergence of CMS, HHS, and health insurance companies abroad that are really thinking about this more robustly. So that's one of the big things that needed to happen. It's happening right now, which is great. The other aspect, the integration of clinical and technical skills in educational curricula companies, professional institutions, this is also being ramped up. Prior to COVID, I did some work to look at the landscape of how many institutions actually taught this in medical school. And there weren't very many, to be honest with you. And sure as heck not to the level that's really needed to touch on digital medicine. Some taught telemedicine, some gave bits and pieces, but very few in that regard. There's an emerging amount of schools that are trying to really develop this and get a foothold and create good structure and training. And it's, I can tell you that over the past year, I've gotten more calls from different medical schools asking how they can do this and kick this off. So you see the need and the tension is there, but this also needs to happen in already existing institutions. So health systems, and companies at large need to invest in this. You've seen a slow emergence of this when there was a rapid switch to telemedicine across institutions and them training up their staff and the struggles with that. But that's definitely apparent. And then a commitment to diversity that goes beyond lip service. We talk a lot about diversity. Very few times you actually see it effectively executed, but this is critically important. If we're going to be doing this well and we're designing, we're setting up things to be designed for everyone, right? We already hear the conversations about this related to immunizations and how they tried to set up studies to better represent the population. It's the same thought process here. When you lead, design, or set up leadership institutions or educational programs, it has to be representative of the people that you're going to be training and or providing care to. So there needs to be a true commitment to a diverse populace in terms of that state for this to be successful.
You walked through that brilliantly. I hope this has piqued people's interest. Please go ahead, read the paper. This was hard, but fun and important to put together. Cole was a very patient collaborator on this as we went through all the nuances of how do we actually say things that we can implement. So looking for, Yayan, we'll hand back to you for a good discussion. And hopefully folks will be excited to dive in with us here at DIME and at institutions across the country to actually put this into action.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. This was great. Let me just start off with the first question. There's sort of several questions really about, beyond medicine, what other fields do you want to see implementing this into their curricula?
Well, Jen, if I'll take a first stab at this, but frankly, medicine, it's really an interprofessional field that we need, right? Medicine is a part of it. We need people trained in computer science. We need people that are better at data management. We need design thinking, trained individuals. We need those that are in the health insurance and health policy world to be a part of this and be trained up on this. So this is a multifaceted field. We need to bring an interprofessional team together. There were a lot of efforts to derive something called a patient-centered medical home, right? Well, this is an expansion of that, saying, well, you need these other team members as a part of that to actually be effective. We have patient portals that need to be improved and adapted for the future of care. How do we incorporate people to be trained as a part of that team and not just in isolation? So I think, Jen, you could probably list off a whole slew of professions that probably need it.
I could, and I have done before. There may even be a table in our paper where you gave me permission to do just that, because I do think it's important. The question was excellent. I'm going to share a couple of nuggets that I think are really interesting. The first thing is, and I think this will resonate with our tech colleagues on the line. Someone said to me the other day, who's a brilliant computer scientist, I'm tired of trying to convince people that water is wet. There is expertise on the technical side around things like, sensor verification, around how you demonstrate that you're measuring what you're actually measuring, around the fact that you have, to the best of your abilities, security systems in place to sort of handle data, so on and so forth. We need sufficient integration of these sort of experts. And I think part of it is recognizing the outsized impact that folks with tech expertise can bring to people's lives and health if they move into healthcare. I saw a really wonderful article this morning that warmed my heart. Cole, I'm not sure if you've heard this yet. Apparently, med school applications in the US are up 11% this year. And I read an article the Fauci effect.
Yeah. People
have been so inspired by his clinical leadership that they want to become physicians. How can we inspire brilliant programmers, white hat hackers, bioethicists to come on in and help us thoughtfully advance the use of digital tools? Like, that's where my mind goes. It should be everyone. And how can we create a vision that is so compelling we can get the best of the best instead of them going to Facebook?
Yeah, and I see a few questions popping up about the difficulty of interprofessional training, the lack of these things on board exams. So fun part is I actually worked on the NBOME to try to address some of this stuff, which is the national board exam for the osteopathic physicians. I also worked on the interprofessional team, the AAMC, AOA, as well as the pharmacy group when they first came out with the interprofessional initiative. And that's really where it needs to sit. You guys are 100% right. This stuff's not easy, but there is a lot of common language here, and we need to find it and continue to enhance it and develop it. And that's why I say health policy is also really important here. The collaborative relationships to enhance and expand interprofessional training needs to get out of this thought process that it's just those that are trained clinically. I think that those in computer science need to be applied, but have to be given insight as well into some of the fundamental failures that we have in healthcare, such as accurate data, which, you know, is a whole nother topic that you could spend a whole, you know, slew of time on. But it's how do we enhance all of these things? But I would start with common language, common measures, and working collaboratively with interprofessional societies that already exist and initiatives that already exist.
I'm going to riff off that real quick, and then Yana, I'm going to give the mic back to you to keep working through these questions. I think that, you know, this idea is we need a level of tech literacy, not just in healthcare, but sort of across the board to power this new digital age, right? Folks talk about it like the fourth sort of industrial revolution, right? This is now the digital age, including of medicine. And I think you're exactly right, Cole, to think about the need to have this expertise in-house with our policymaking colleagues, with our regulatory colleagues as well. I think anyone who knows even the tiniest bit about technology, who's watched some of the tech giants take questions in front of Congress and the type of questions they were fielding, we need this expertise in policy staffers. We need it in regulatory offices. And I think that, you know, one of the challenges that Cole and I talked about in the paper is, you know, there's a digital sort of skills drought across the board. And so this goes back to our call to say, how do we make the outsized impact that tech experts could make in the healthcare space? How do we articulate that? How do we not have folks think about Theranos when they think about sort of innovation in healthcare, but instead think about the patients we're serving to attract the best talent? So I think that's an important piece too. And Yayan, I will actually hand back to you now.
No, it's great, really great discussion. I think, as you say, I think this is really important issues. I think especially the points that have been made around sort of, interfield training, right? That's traditionally not how we develop people, right? You are a computer scientist, or you are a medic, or you are whatever. It's sort of, we pull together so many things in this field that, we really need people who are able to bridge and at least communicate across those boundaries, if not be actually trained in them. I'm just aware that we're of time, so I'm going to open this up now to the larger panel with some of the bigger questions that have emerged in the questions around these talks. And just to carry on from what we're discussing now is a lot of people have talked, or a lot of the questions have really been around value, and being able to actually implement that into, everyday practice. And something that has been touched on is really interpretability of what is being captured and communicated, right? So, and especially in terms of transitioning some of the more emerging capabilities into really everyday practice, it seems like one of the biggest hurdles is getting over that interpretability, both in terms of face validity and digestibility. Do people want to comment on that? Like, how important is that that simplicity and sort of communicability in really getting this into everyday practice?
I could touch on that a little bit. When you have people that aren't exposed to a lot of the fields needed to really understand the dynamics of some of this stuff, if it is not simple, it will not be used. And it has to be easily accessible, and frankly, have a standardized repository for us to be able to go to. As clinicians, we use something like a clinical decision support tool like UpToDate, right? Where you can search something, find the evidence, look at the level of evidence and be able to act on it. We need something like that for digital medicine. We need something that has a breakdown of what, or it should be added to UpToDate, frankly, that provides those options and availability. I think that the dynamic that we face with this stuff is also related to, you know, insurance coverage, right? There are certain medications that will be on formulary one year and then off the next. And I wonder and hope that it is not the case with digital medicine interventions to keep it simple for both patients and care team members.
Marta, I actually am hoping that you might jump in on this, because I always think, you know, it's, on the one hand, you know, we discussed that sort of the North Star is still the same, but it's really different. And I think about data flows in particular, right? We come from Cole, listening to you as a clinician and saying we need to keep it simple. We used to have these sort of these snapshot measures, and now we have these enormous flows of data. How do we handle that? How do we learn from that? How do we integrate that without just reducing the dimensionality to the point where we might as well have just done what we've been doing all along?
I think it is a great question. I think something that may still yet to come in a larger amount is the evidence that shows that this data collected passively over a long period of time actually does bring benefit that can incentivize individuals to like contribute their data or start using the app, such a achievement to learn more insights. This is my experience and observation that like a lot of research focus on a lot of epidemiological or clinical research that use the sensor devices is indeed focusing on a shorter amount of time of monitoring. For example, we get a snapshot as short as like a couple of hours, or in-lab monitoring ranging maybe to a couple of weeks, maybe max months of monitoring, which does provide very often a very interesting evidence about the certain point that individual is at, like their current state, but I believe lacks this longitudinal overview of how individual is moving over time. So my understanding, my belief would be that once we are there with more evidence that such data is provided, users may be more, like individuals may be more willing to start using apps, hoping that they're going to get the benefit. And I believe we already do have a tools that Achievement platform is an example of that, actually allow individuals to sync their devices and their fitness apps in a fairly feasible, easy way.
I'd like to follow on what you just said, Marta, that I think it's really critical that this kind of trade-off between you know, what's worth doing is you know, a clinician. I think a couple of years ago there was a survey of thousands of physicians about, you know, how much time do you spend on administrative duties, and like a third spend 20 hours a week doing nothing except essentially checking boxes for regulatory and billing and all sorts of crazy things that really don't actually provide any value to, in the end, to a patient. I'm obviously being a little sarcastic, not sarcastic, but maybe overstating this. But the bottom line is that the time is of value as well as the cost of doing things. And so if you're going to have some new outcome measure that's digitally generated, that it has to be clear as to what value does that bring. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges we all face. You know, think about the adoption of the electronic medical record. How did that actually happen? It was by bribing physicians, offering them potentially tens of thousands of dollars to their practice if they showed, quote, meaningful use of the EMR, at least in this country. So, you know, I think there's this combination of incentives, literally maybe monetary, as well as, you know, but in the end, hopefully that monetary incentive is tied to some useful, meaningful outcome. And it may be, you know, that a lot of things we do it's just as easy to ask somebody as opposed to, you know, wire them up in some way for months on end. We have to be open to that, but we have to have the evidence for, you know, what really is going to work.
Can I riff off this a little bit? I go back to the title of the special issue, which is sort of the future of digital health. I think that as a field, whether we are on the care delivery side or on the research side, we have this obsession with the visit, right? Because that's where care and research used to get done, right? You would come to your clinic visit as part of your trial, or you would come to the doctor's office and you would see the doctor, and maybe you would need to come back and you would do a follow-up. Marta, I really liked how you discussed sort of the evidence needed to trust these new data flows. But I also think the idea that we would then try and shoehorn all of their evaluation and the reaction to them into a visit sort of framework doesn't seem like we are realizing the true potential of sort of the future of the field. The idea that we can now sort of deliver nudges, deliver support maybe from allied care professionals in almost real time, that we can use software to help power those triggers. We can have the right person reaching out at the right time with the right intervention, that it doesn't have to be in the clinic. And we could potentially have people seamlessly moving between sort of their normal everyday lives, getting triggers that actually they may be at risk of becoming a patient if they don't take some action. Maybe that could be behavioral to begin with, then maybe they enter the healthcare space, unfortunately, but then they could seamlessly transition between sort of care and research, because this data doesn't live in a manila folder anymore, locked in a file cabinet. So rightly so, everyone's brought up this idea of sort of reimbursement and incentives, but I would be sad if all we did was use a variety of digital tools to do exactly what we've always done in a different place.
Absolutely. Okay, we're coming to the end now, so let me just finish with one anonymous question that we sent. It got sent in. There was a very provocative, and I suspect someone from the playbook is involved here, because there is hashtag adoption in there. So to finish out, really, from your perspectives, how do we continue to drive widespread adoption of these tools and sensors? Are we talking, do we want a top-down, providers pushing them, reimbursement models, federal support and guidance, or do we want to listen to the patients themselves and take that user pressure to change the system? Where do you fall on that spectrum, or do you think that pressure will come from somewhere completely different?
Well, I can comment on this real quick, because I got to run and see a patient in a moment here. So I don't think we should be pushing anything. Behavior change does not start with push typically, right? It has to be an intrinsic motivation, but there's a difference that I think we tend to blur these lines very, unfortunately. If it's medically oriented and it's something that needs to be prescribed after a diagnosis for remote monitoring, they need to see their healthcare professionals, they need to be diagnosed, should be covered, should have clear evidence related to it. And it's a shared decision-making option with the patient. Nothing is forced. It's an option. If you'd like to pursue this, it's yours. For the other focus, though, that other line is health promotion, right? And that's not something separate than medicine, but it is separate from a diagnosis. So health promotion is something that has to be intrinsically motivated. And frankly, I see the opportunity through health insurance companies actually providing these devices. And if they meet certain criteria for health promotion, perhaps getting the incentive of reduction of premiums or monthly premiums, et cetera. But I could see that as a feasible thing that fits into our current model, but I don't think it's an all or nothing game.
I agree with you, Cole, and Jeff, you brought up, how we drove with nothing but sheer brute force, sort of the adoption of EHR. And I think if we ask most doctors, and we have two on the line here, what do you hate the most? There's even a New Yorker article, I think, that says doctors hate their computers. It wasn't successful, right? If we try and strong arm this again, it is not going to be a good situation. So, I do think it's a rich patchwork of aligned incentives, not sort of bullying, but what are we all trying to do here? and what are the incentives for the different stakeholders to come to the table and do their part, you know, coupled with you know, structures, you know, disinterested but very passionate sort of third parties to help be the facilitator. Lynn, I go back to what you're achieving with MOBILISE-D, because, you know, a collaboration has come together and IMI is being the catalyst there, right? There are these other sort of supporting institutions to help. So, you know, to some extent, I think we need, you know, carrots, maybe not a stick, but a gentle tap here and there. And I'm of the opinion that if we make better serving patients the North Star, if we make the fact that we potentially have a whole new armory to address challenges that have plagued the field for years, healthcare isn't affordable by the individual or society. We have terrible, terrible health outcomes relative to health economics. We don't have health equity. And there's an opportunity, not for digital to be a magic wand, but to have new tools in the toolbox to maybe move the needle on these things that we haven't been able to, despite best efforts, for decades.
Yeah, I was going to just add that I think this, you know, there's some positive silver lining of COVID is that maybe the Trojan horse for digital medicine actually has been the need to do remote visits on a much wider scale. So it's opened the eyes of both families and patients as well as clinicians as to the potential. Obviously, lots of challenges have been exposed through that experience, but I think that the concept of, oh, actually we can use the, you know, the digital technology in a you know, more widespread way may then allow people to at least begin to think, well, maybe there's some other things that can be done. So I think that may be part of the way forward.
I agree with that. I think that for all of the awful things that are happening with COVID, it's also provided an opportunity. And, you know, sometimes the timing is right, and it may be that really harnessing the opportunity now and looking at the timing and changes, a more positive view is going to be helpful to bring people together and work towards more solutions in this area.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And on that note, I think we are at time. So it just leaves me a few seconds just to really, firstly thank all the authors, the reviewers, the editors, everybody at CAGR for putting together the special issue with us. And also a huge thanks to Jen and everybody at DIME for helping us do this workshop, and for everybody who's dialed in and submitted such great questions. So thank you very much, everybody, and bye.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.